Welcome to the EmpowHERment Show, a podcast designed to empower women like you to take control of your lives, make informed decisions, and redefine success on your own terms beyond the noise of influencer culture. All right. Welcome back to the EmpowHERment Show, everyone. Today, we are really excited to have Claire Uhar on. Claire is a friend of mine, and we have a funny story about how we met and the work she's done since. But to give you a teaser of the topic we're going to be covering with Claire, we are going to discuss the creator economy today. It's a buzzword. It's something you hear a lot of people who maybe don't know what they're talking about say oftentimes. I think a lot of people don't understand what a creator versus an influencer and everything in between is. And so today we're going to really unpack it and what it means for society and for our economy and for how we consume media. They will impact the future of labor, of small business, and media and activism, all topics that are really important to you all today. So with that, Claire, would love to have you introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do. And maybe you can also tell our guests how we met.
I would love to. Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you all for having me, and watching this show come to life has been so inspiring and I think so needed. We'll touch on a lot of those topics today of just, I think, the power of authenticity, but also accessibility and also authority. And I think that that's really rare when there's so much out there. We are in what I call a curation crisis. And I think a lot of what I do in my day-to-day job is curating people, companies, ideas, and concepts. So for quick context, I'm now CEO and founder of a company called Obscure. We're based in LA. At our simplest form, we are an advisory, and we focus specifically on companies that are nearing pivotal moments in media and tech. So we primarily focused on all things development, brand development, business development, and corporate development. And I like to say that we operate purely at intersections. So as all of these industries and institutions and individuals feel scattered or undefined or obscure, we at Obscure sort of sit at the middle and help navigate. So when we're bridging the gap between tech and policy or media and policy, we're also cognizant that everything is part of the same ecosystem. And if we're going to operate in ecosystems the way that our clients operate in ecosystems, we have to be able to navigate and build them. So that is what I'm up to now, running Obscure. We have an obscure set of amazing clients all at those intersections, and we help them with navigating whatever those pivotal moments are as they evolve. Previous to that, and what brought me to that, is a decade of sitting at the most pivotal moments of early and growth stage companies. The first of which was when I was 21 years old, a community-based events platform known as WeGo, who is going out. We were super creative with the name, but I was tapped.
So is this like college parties kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
College parties. And I was tapped to run the community and marketing at the ripe age of 19, turning 20.
Wow.
And it was incredible. I got to craft exactly what our community would be, what our ambassadors would be, and what really kind of the publicity and partners that we would activate would look like. And this was all at the beginning of the creator economy. As I look back, it was sort of a perfect marriage of my roots and my DNA of a classically trained professional ballerina mom turned CFO to a naval engineer turned recycling entrepreneur dad. And that sort of like creative and corporate combination. When I started my career with WeGo, I was coming out of school where I was a computer science major and a sorority girl at the same time, technically blonde. It was a horrible spinoff of Legally Blonde. It felt like,
Technically blonde.
But technically blonde. And I think that again, like corporate and creative combo brought me to this really great opportunity with building WeGo. And that was so powerful at the time. I had no idea what I was doing or what I was building. But I got to be on this rocket ship. And we built an incredible platform with unbelievable investors We ended up exiting it. And we'll get into some of the detail of all these different experiences, but we exited it. I landed in San Francisco. San Francisco then took me back to DC, DC to New York to LA, now to Obscure. In that 10-year period, I was on the ground with founders, or I was sitting in the founder seat of some of the most pivotal companies in the creator economy as we know it today. Before that was a term. And so that included social impact, that included media and traditional news with a company called Protocol. And that was sort of the journey. So 10 years later, after sitting in those seats, I decided that was a company and to guide other founders as they neared their pivotal moments. So much more on the story as we weave through questions, but that is my background. And Maddie and I met on a literal farm. In Kansas City, which is in Missouri. Kansas City in Missouri.
Missouri.
Exactly. And we were at a state financial officials
foundation. SFOF. Yep.
Conference, where we spotted each other literally across the field. And I was there on behalf of a company, Everfi, that I worked with in the social impact space. And we were on a tractor ride. Again, you can't make this up. We were on a tractor ride at this conference, which was like the bonding activity. And we were the only two people using cell phones. To take photos, of course, and post on Instagram. And two, we were the only people there under the age of 60. So for another horrible spinoff,
I think that data point that makes it funnier.
Exactly.
This is essentially Republican state treasurers. This event that they were at.
Right. Yeah. And they were all like super, super nice people. It was just kind of like Claire and I were fish out of water. We were like,
it's a different generation.
Different generation, different mindset. We both were in like the earliest phases of our career. I think the next day I got thrown on stage and I had to give a speech to said state financial officers. Anyway, so it was like a spin-off of The Simple Life. Maddie would be Paris Hilton and I would be Nicole Richie, for those of you who can visually see us. Adama also hung the moon back then. So I would say we were basking in your light. So anyway, keep the compliment train running. Anyway, so that's how Maddie and I met. And we have remained dear friends. And I remember even at the earliest stages of this show, Maddie coming and sharing the idea and the concept, and it weaves in pretty appropriately to the topic of today, as I mentioned. So anyway, with that scatter of amazing, funny stories and cultural references between Legally Blonde and Simple Life, I'm super excited to dive in.
We are too. And I have to say too, Claire, it's so funny because those friends, and Adama and Sam, I'm sure you have friends too, where you just have no idea what they actually do. You just see them like going to events or like talking.
I think that's how people think about Adama and I, actually. I think
100%. Absolutely.
What is your job?
Yeah, but like as lobbyists, you two, we did that whole episode on, if you haven't listened to it, we did a whole episode on lobbying. There's part 1 and part 2, explaining like what it is, how it works, and like dispelling some myths. And I think a lot of people don't understand that profession, and it's like fascinating, and you just see like shows on TV about it. But yes, Claire, you are like the equivalent of a lobbyist to me. I'm somebody who understands the lobbying profession, but for most people, like what you have done, and like when we actually were preparing for this episode and you were talking about your career path, like you've told me about all this, and I've been friends with you now for almost a decade. But when you really actually explained like what you do and what Obscure is founded on, I was like, oh, that's what she does. Like light bulb went off for me. So really looking forward to more light bulbs going off in this conversation. But yes, so creator economy, you were steeped in it from the start of your career without even intentionally, winding up in this industry. Something that is really fascinating to all of us as, policy nerds is that Congress just created the Creator Economy Caucus. I think it was announced a week ago, actually. And by the time this streams, 2 weeks ago. So can you talk a bit about why you think that they have done that. And also, I think you were at the event where it got announced, right? Can you tell us more about like what led to that?
Yeah, I was at one of the events that I think recognized it, which I think is the most important part of why the caucus exists. And it really is, I think, about recognition, recognition and regulation of something that has existed for a really long time that we barely even put a name on, the creator economy, until a couple of years ago. And I think that government recognizing that something exists brings it into a whole new level of legitimacy. And that's really, I think, the most important point of the caucus being now a thing, is that it is not just recognized by the individuals. You'll hear me use this framing a lot, but the individuals that are actually creating the content, or the institutions, the platforms, or the brands that are funding it, not even just as an industry anymore, but also by a governing body that has the power to actually change how it functions. And that's where your all's brilliance really comes in. But I think that it's a really pivotal moment for the economy, being the creator economy as a whole, to be recognized, to be valued in that legitimate sense of getting some regulation and recognition. I think what's really powerful too behind this caucus in particular is that it's bipartisan, in a moment where it feels really difficult to get anything across lines and anywhere in that middle aisle. And so to see two representatives come together and make some change and make that recognition and build some regulations that really help boost those individuals who have built that economy, and haven't always been compensated fairly, by the way, is I think really an interesting moment. So the caucus itself, it'll be interesting to see how it is received and to see how it actually is executed. At the event that I went to last week, Anna Palmer, who is a forever icon in my eyes, and I think just doing really, really important and powerful work, has always been, I think, at the cutting edge of covering things before they actually get to the Hill. And so, true to form, I happened to be in DC last week for some client work, and I saw the news break about the Creator Caucus. And naturally, the minute that I started to say, "Oh, Creator Caucus," somebody else said, "Oh, Anna's already doing an event on that. You should probably go." So I went last week. They had a wonderful event. It was powered by YouTube. It's all around a 4-part series. And the idea is really, I think, to bring some of the voices that we can so easily access on platforms, bring those voices to life and start to translate a little bit between the media and creator economy as it operates sort of separately in Hollywood and New York and everywhere else. But to translate that to Washington and let the folks on the Hill kind of know what this means on a hyper local level, on a national level, on an international level. And it was really cool to see that come to life with a partner like YouTube. Patreon was also involved in the caucus. And so, to have that sort of corporate support from platforms, I think is really important. And I think especially today when a lot of those platforms are led by certain individuals, to have corporate support and again, kind of have the backing for those individuals being the creators.
Can you tell our listeners, just because everybody might not know who Anna Palmer is, everyone might not know about Punchbowl, and just so to give them the background on her and why it's important that she's involved.
Of course. So Anna Palmer is, again, icon when it comes to the world of journalism. She and Jake Sherman were integral to the Politico ecosystem with their newsletter Playbook. And they spun off separately a couple of years ago to start Punchbowl News, which I think is, again, when we're talking about intersections and the power of those intersections and how industries talk to each other and translate to each other. I think they're certainly a pillar of media that has done that, I think, in a really powerful way and carries that authority even through moments where it's tough to trust everything that's out there. So Anna Palmer is, again, total trailblazer. But this event, I think, was no exception in terms of bringing a corporate partner, a voice of an actual creator to Washington, getting on a stage and asking some tougher questions in a moment where a caucus was being announced.
Totally. Let's back up a bit too. So I want to kind of bifurcate the phrase creator economy, because there are a ton of economic implications of this new industry profession. And, I'll get into that. But Claire, when you hear the word creator, what do you think? And how would you separate? I think a lot of people get the ick when they hear the word influencer. How would you separate those two concepts?
So I think influencer has become an overused word. And I think we can get really tangled in terminology. I think influencer is an important word. It is one that matters right now. It is one that a lot of people probably identify as knowing. To me, the key differentiator is that an influencer is somebody who has built a following purely off of the influence that they have built on a platform. A creator is somebody who has an expertise, an art, a craft. That's not to take away from influencers by any means, but has a craft or an art that could exist separately, right? It could exist without those platforms, and those platforms are a distribution channel.
Interesting. Okay, so somebody like us three gals might go, oh, collectively, we have a lot of policy, business, and nonprofit acumen. In Sam's case, let's pool our knowledge and resources together to produce content a la this podcast. So would we be constituted as creators in that case?
I would constitute you as creators. Yes.
Whoa. Okay. Well, don't have that on my resume.
We were actually trying to figure this out the other day because we all had different definitions. And I was like, I don't know that I'm either of those things, but
yeah.
Here.
Newsflash
later. and I just did a segment last week, right? And I actually gave some examples. So people that we watch and we consume fall in both of these categories. As I define it, an influencer is probably more of a Kim Kardashian or an Alex Earl. Incredibly talented, incredibly successful. Examples of influencers, right? Alex Earl, Kim Kardashian have built these incredible empires, like unbelievable business people, unbelievable influence and impact. I believe will be in history books, right? Can we believe that? Creators, think like Gary Vaynerchuk, right?
Okay.
The three of you, right? Like Gary built businesses, brings that business guidance, that motivational element, the motivational elements of what he has built in terms of a career holistically, and uses social media as a distribution for that. You think about somebody who is an incredible cartoonist. It could even be people who do comedy sketches, right? And didn't do that before social, but they are creators with something that is being distributed through these channels, right? So the three of you would still talk about these topics.
Sure. So in influencers' case, it's like they're monetizing the audience they have built on these channels. And then in creators' case, it's monetizing the expertise they can distribute through these channels.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think what's really interesting too right now is not everybody holds that same definition.
That's sure. I mean, that's why I was asked you, because I'm like, even the phrase creator economy. So, the creator economy was valued at $250 billion as of 2 years ago, and it's projected to reach almost $500 billion by 2027. So 2x in 4 years. But the phrase creator economy, I'm like, okay, and that valuation, that's the whole enchilada, right? It's influencers, creators, everything in between. And so I don't really have a concept of how much money people in this space are actually making based upon whatever it is they're doing. And I don't even have a concept now of whatever it is people are doing online. It seems like a new business model is popping up every day.
You hear something crazy like that my daughter points out where she's like, that's Rudy Tooty. And all he does is talk crap while he plays Minecraft, but he makes $12 million a year. And I'm like, the fuck? What?
It is a black box to me.
Totally. And I'm like, wait, how have I not cracked the code on this, guys? I'm over here like toiling away every day. Like, God, I could just be like streaming myself talking about how annoyed I am by the world. What?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of what we're doing now, to be fair. But anyway.
I do think to your question around the caucus, though, like more broadly, if we go even a level higher, right? It's an indicator, I think, again, with that legitimacy and that structure that is now being put around the economy, the creator economy, right? And the definition of it, acknowledgement of it, and then an understanding of how to navigate it. I'm really keeping an eye out for what that means as the pendulum may swing back, as belts may tighten. So it could
say more about that. What do you mean in terms of belts tightening, pendulum swinging back? Are you seeing a trend in the industry where companies are not as warm to the idea about working with influencers or creators or whatever?
It's a really, really good question. And I think it will be an evolving answer over the next few years. What I am seeing, having been on the fringes of not just the creator economy, but traditional media and entertainment and tech, and the platformization of it all, is that it does run the risk, creators and influencers do run the risk of becoming another form of advertising arbitrage. So we are really smart. Consumers are really smart. Humans are really smart. And subconsciously or consciously, when we know that something is being paid for, it doesn't come off as authentic. And I think that a lot of creators and influencers right now, and eventually by proxy, the platforms will have to navigate that, which is do the consumers outsmart the paid placements? And if somebody is just shaking athletic greens in my face, do they actually drink athletic greens, or are they being paid?
Right. Well, I have a great story. So, and I think regulators, number one, are trying to catch up with this, right? Regulators are actually trying to make sure that we are not, fabricating results and misleading people and sort of using social media as a new form of misleading advertisement. So, my parents did their best, but I, had a lot of limited options in the 80s for dental care. And I always just had horrible teeth. I mean, just really horrible. And it wasn't until the last couple of years. Right. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that I was able to just sort of go and get like my whole mouth fixed, which was always miserable. And I spent hours online trying to figure out where to go. And I ended up going to a dentist who's outstanding in Beverly Hills, actually. And so he has all sorts of celebrity clients. So I now have like a series of like bridges, veneers, just like I'm like Frankenstein mouth. It looks great, but like...
No, it looks great. I was going to say, it's not Frankenstein at all.
It was 2 days of 8-hour surgeries. Like there was a lot happening in my mouth. And so afterwards, I now have a series of all these porcelain veneers. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do to take care of them? I drink I'm red wine. I'm coffee till I'm red wine, and then I'm coffee again. So, what whitening do I use on my teeth? And he goes, oh no, baby, you don't have to use whitening on those. Those are porcelain veneers. They will be that color until the day you die and someone pulls them out of your head. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? Because I know who some of your clients are, and some of his clients in LA who are influencers represent some really large whitening brands for their teeth. In fact, I have purchased their whitening products for my teeth prior to having to have like my Frankenstein mouth rebuilt. And I was like, what do you mean I don't have to use whitener? And he's like, Sam, no, just brush your teeth. They're porcelain. Like it's fine. And I'm like, well, then why are they selling whitening product for their teeth if they all also have porcelain veneers? They don't even need that shit. And he just laughed and he's like, how they get their money is not my business, girl. And so, here you have a dentist who by his own right is an influencer. And then these influencers going to the dentist, and then they're selling a completely different product that none of them need. because they have beautiful porcelain veneers that I bought for like 5 years trying to fix
thinking that it would fix your teeth before you got the porcelain veneers.
Right? I mean, it was definitely not going to fix the teeth falling out of my mouth ever, but like nonetheless, I want to put a shine on it. And I tell this story all the time. I'm like, what? But it's, right now, if you took on an ad in a magazine and you were like, look at my bright, shiny white teeth, and I used Super Duper Smile for it, that would be illegal. You couldn't do that. It would be misleading advertising. But you can go on your social media and get paid and say, hey, I use these great products.
Let's get into that, actually.
They figured out how to tax people when they're buying stuff on the internet. They sure did figure that out.
Yeah, the tax implications here are a whole other whammy. But, actually, you were just, so on the show, we like to talk about toxic trends. And there's a couple trends related to the creator economy that I really want to get all your ladies' thoughts on. And like, if you disagree with me, by all means, let's have a debate because we have productive debates on this show.
And Maddie has feelings about influencers.
I have so many feelings. And like, by the way, I have a lot of friends who are influencers, and like my brother is dating a woman he's probably going to marry who is an influencer with like 200,000 followers on Instagram. And she is a lovely human being. So I just want to caveat, nothing against them. I just am seeing some toxic trends in the ecosystem. Okay. So for example, I really, really hate how it's called the pick me creator economy, where women are leaning into internalized misogyny, to be quite honest, to go viral. So they're mocking feminism and they're taking on these like traditional gender roles, like trad wife. That's like totally something proliferating on TikTok. And like dismissing women's struggles for like validation or monetization. And just like this anti-feminism is now kind of like a niche on the internet due to the rise of the influencer economy and how much money brands are making by peddling products through women who are staying at home. And I think it's really, really toxic. So I don't know. What do you ladies think?
I mean, I don't really look at stuff like that. So that doesn't really like.
So why am I getting fed it?
I mean, if it comes to my page, like chances are I just scroll past it because like that's not my life and it's not what I'm interested in. Okay. So like, I just remember for the longest people were trying to tell me about like Ballerina Farm or whatever. I still had never heard of it. I still have never seen any of it, but like, I feel like I know a lot about some of these different influencers. Like it's been forced on me, right? Like I've had to hear about them, but most of that will just never come across my thing. Like you, I don't really care. Like if that's your deal and you love having the kids, the farm, the husband, the cooking in gowns or like whatever you do, I don't care. I think that's great. But yeah, when it kind of turns into this thing where it's like, you're not living your life right, unless this is how you're living, because this is what women should be doing.
Or it's a way, I think what bothers me about it is that it is now a way for women to make money. And they are in many ways, I think, being exploited, but it's also, somewhat of it's not like they're volunteering to do it. They're opting into this, economic model. Well, but it disturbs me a little bit.
I think there's like I'm all for women get your money and I'm also for women get your resources, right? So, I mean, 24 years ago or so, the internet was around. There were social media presences, but I have celiac disease, so I can't eat gluten. I was vegan for like 7 years. Do you know how hard it was to find a bread? Do you know how hard it was to like bake a birthday cake? I would have loved for some trad wife bitch to be like, I'm going to make a cake, girl. Like, I had to figure that out all the hard way. I had to fight with my ex-husband. He's like, why are you going to the farmer's co-op to spend $300 on flour? Like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it out. Like, there weren't Reddit boards back then. You were in the worst parts of the internet, like trying to figure it out. And so I think there's something about, again, like, what's your critical thinking? Like, hey, you know what? I will go watch this to see how to make this really good thing that I want to make.
I want to make bubble gum from scratch, or I want to make Coca-Cola from scratch.
Right, or like, some of these trad wives, they are like making bullshit. Like if you actually bake, you're watching them and you're like, this is not how you fucking bake. This is not even, that is not a real thing what you're doing right now in your gown. But nonetheless, so like critical thinking resources, good. Go get your money, girls, if that's what you're doing. But in a lot of these cases, it's actually like well-funded nepotism or institutional. I'm like, oh my God, she's making these great muffins. And I'm like, holy cow, when did this become an ad for the Mormon church? That's weird. That's not really what I subscribed to here. And so, it is, I think, to Claire's point about the authenticity, like you can come for something and people can bring you in for more. And that's okay. But it's when it's sort of, to the point of indoctrination or paid advertising and it's not disclosed. Like, is this sponsored by a brand? Is this sponsored by a political party? Is this sponsored by a religious institution? Those are things I would want to know prior to engaging in the content. Because at the end of the day, I just wanted to go there because I really miss chocolate chip muffins, girl. Like,
but I think that this is a really important point to touch on. And there's two parties when it comes to, there's many parties, obviously, but there's two parties that I think a lot about in the creator economy. And that's the people or those individuals, which include the creators, the influencers, and the consumers. And then there's the platforms. And for, I believe, far too long, we ignored the platform part of the conversation. And I am really lucky that aside from the more up and coming growth stage companies that we work with at Obscure, I also have access points within the larger platforms like TikTok and Meta and Snapchat, right? And I do think that the time was yesterday to Maddie's point and to Sam's point and Adama's point. I mean, all of you are making sort of the same point here, which is the consumer needs to know what they are consuming. They need to be trained in some form, whether it's in real time or it is before we give a 16-year-old a phone, or I hate that I'm saying this, but an 8-year-old a phone. What are you navigating, right? We have these devices which are amazing and they're magic. They're magic. And the creator economy can be magic, right? It can make somebody in Iowa's dreams of becoming an actress come true. So, we don't want to diminish that, but it does come with some rules. This thing is also a casino. I think it was Scott Galloway on the Pivot podcast that said, we're handing a casino a porn site and unlimited access to everything on the internet, as well as an, uncontrolled phone line to kids who barely even know who they are, right? And barely even know, some of the fundamentals of.
It's barely a phone anymore. Let's
no,
the whole world.
Never mind, like as a parent, I mean, I've worked in tech policy for years, and there is still stuff that I have learned years before I would have learned it from work because my daughter figured it out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had all the parental controls and we had all the conversations. And even in a state like California, where I live and spend most of my regulatory time, although I'm doing like fun things like Utah this week, but whatever, like we're so slow. Even in the state that houses the innovation economy, if you were to edit the digital literacy curriculum to try and catch up with the technology, it's like a 4-year window if we have the money to do it. And so by then you're already too late. And so I learned all sorts of horrible stuff from my daughter. I mean, I remember touring Snapchat when she was little and being like, oh, they're doing all these great things to look out for kids online. And my daughter was like, cool, all of my friends, drug dealers, they meet on Snapchat and that's how they hook up to have them drive by their houses. Like,
And I think that's,
cool.
Again, why I love having conversations with people like the three of you is, we talked a little bit about this on our prep call, but like that word of regulation and how we regulate and how we put rules in place, and to do that in a way that is proactive versus punitive. Mm-hmm. And, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place where, especially with these platforms, we're taking things away if we're trying to regulate them. Right. Versus on an ongoing basis, making those decisions in real time. And, I think that's true of these social media platforms. It is going to be true if we don't play our cards right with AI. It's already looking that way. But again, there's a way to have your cake and eat it too. Back to cake, right? There's a way to have your cake and eat it too, but do it in a responsible way and do it in a way that's highly personalized to the segments of your community. And I've found from a trend perspective, so much of our work has actually veered slightly away from the brand development or the business development. And it's really started to lean into navigating communities and community development for platforms big and small, for new and emerging companies in tech and media. How do we build that community in a way that is mindful, in a way that is personalized, because that's the new consumer expectation. And, sadly, the largest, most powerful platforms in the world didn't think that way 15, 20 years ago. And it
still don't to any degrees.
They still don't, right? And I think, it may be an interesting and different perspective, but, in some ways I actually feel for them, right? They are stuck between that rock and the hard place. I don't feel bad for some of their leaders, but I do feel bad for some of the true operators of those companies who now have to say, oh, wait, we're being viewed as a monopoly, and now maybe YouTube isn't actually part of Google. Ruh-roh. That sucks. And so anyway, but
in terms of a regulatory environment, we work so hard to sort of ascribe blame, who's the problem. Yeah. And, if you look over the repertoire of all history, bad actors, confused people, and, hapless idiots have always managed to use communication tools to wreak havoc, right? Whether it was the invention, whether it was pigeon delivered letters or the invention of the printing press or, whatever it has been, there has always been an opportunity for people to use it to do bad things. And this is why, I got a few years ago when we were looking at broadband privacy laws, I went down very deep down a rabbit hole on Telegram privacy laws, right? Because you had some dude be and so there were really serious penalties for bro if I'm going to tell my mom what you tell, so every time that we have new technology, we have to think about, who accidentally or intentionally could misuse this, who accidentally or intentionally could be harmed. And I think the frustrating thing about policy right now is we have never had a more complex scenario of who could misuse it, who could be harmed, who could do it on purpose, who could do it accidentally. And then platforms with so much untapped capacity for things that even the platform developers haven't thought of, that people using them might. And there's just this effort to really limit and ascribe blame and drive it into, well, it must be the developer, or it must be the app guy, or it must be Google, or it must be whomever. And it's just not always as simple as that, right? It's not always, although in some cases, but it's not always
that has to be addressed. It's not,
you can't
just narrow it down. It's not whack-a-mole, right?
And I think, I jokingly say this, but I also say it with a lot of serious tone, which is, at these moments of revolutions, right? Industrial revolution, technological revolution, intelligence revolution that we're entering right now. One, we tend to be so retrospective about it versus acknowledging them when they're actually happening. And two, I think that one of the biggest human flaws is that we forget that we are evolving beings in evolving industries, in an evolving society that's actually spinning faster on all of those levels than it ever has before. And within each of those revolutions, I'm going to throw a pun, but within each of those revolutions, they don't exist without the word evolution, which is we have to be continuously changing. We can't let the thing just change us. And so when we're in these conversations about creator economy or AI or all of the above, like that's sort of my answer, which is like, it's not just about like what we do right now in this hour, because in 15 minutes, it's going to look so different. And in 15 years, it's going to be even more different. Right. So like, even if we try to make rules right now, right, let's just do it. Let's stop overthinking, make the rule that makes sense for now, get people on board to the ecosystem point. And the ecosystem thing is something that I think brands have to be operating as. And they have to recognize that like their product does not exist without users. Those users do not exist without the brand and the feel that they create on multiple platforms in multiple places. So it is an ecosystem, and everybody has to be able to sort of survive and thrive off of each other, or it's just going to break.
Well, I think
recognizing that lawmakers and regulators don't really understand this ecosystem, though, I'm curious, especially for my policy expert friends here, you know, and Claire, maybe I'll ask this to you, and I'd be curious for the policy lens from Adama and Sam. If you had to pinpoint 2 to 3 policy gaps when it comes to the creator economy that you see as major risks right now, what might those be? And then Adama and Sam, how might we respond from a legislative perspective or regulatory?
I like that. I have a very literal answer as my first one.
Go for it.
Which is, I think that again, platforms and companies that are participating in the creator economy don't make policy makers feel welcome. And I say this about every segment of a community to all of our clients, right? Know your customer, but welcome them in. If you're going to build an ecosystem, welcome them in. Know your competitors. Find a way to welcome them in. The best way to compete is to convene, right? Know what you're good at. Know what someone else to your left or your right is good at. Same goes for investors, right? Know who your potential investor, your potential partner is, and invite them in. I think we've left policymakers out of that. And it's always been that policymakers are, again, the fun buster, the person who's going to come in and tell us like what we can and can't do. And the way I view it, because I've had exposure to that world, is the policymaker can actually be your best ally and your best friend because they're looking at it from the outside. So I don't know that it's like necessarily a gap that relates to a specific policy or issue, but I think we have to start first by better bridging that gap between big tech and policy, better bridging that gap between business and policy. And that's actually not on the policymakers to do that work. That is on businesses to structure themselves so that they are enabled to invite in policymakers and make those policymakers their friends and have them advocate.
Smart of YouTube and Patreon to host that event last week then.
So, I think that's part one. In terms of actual issues, and this maybe tees up the response from Adama and Sam, I think one, obviously children. And not just—
I wasn't going to go there, but you did.
Yeah. And I don't even mean just like children in the sense of kids from 3 to 10 or anything. I mean, next generation. And from that sort of evolution mentality, not just Gen Z, not just Gen Alpha, but Gen behind them. Again, like proactivity versus being punitive or reactive. Like, what are we doing to keep them safe? And I was asked this question at a dinner for a media client the other week, and they said, when was the first time you were identified as a leader? And I've never answered this question, and I wasn't prepped for it. And my instinct was when my little sister was born, and I was 2 years old, because it was the first time that somebody told me I had to protect someone. And my take is policy leaders, business leaders, tech leaders, investors, you name it. If you want to be a leader, you need to sign the fuck up to protect. And I think that first are the most vulnerable and weak, helpless people. Children are a huge segment of that. And so, that's one big issue. And then I think the other issue, which is maybe more scientific, and I don't know where this will go, but I'm going to throw it out there, is the effects of looking at something like this all day long on brain memory, on the ability to creatively think, on the ability to think for yourself, to make sense of the world we live around. We've gone from proximity, which is how evolution happened before the internet, of you go to your corner store, you call your local lawyer, you get a referral for somebody to do your highlights, right? It was all proximity based, who was close and who was known. We now proxy it all out and we say, oh, Kylie Jenner says this lip kit works, or Alex Earl told me that this whitener will help my teeth be white. And, that's a very complex world that we're just not innate to. And that I think is going to have huge repercussions in the long run. I don't even know if that's something that policymakers are thinking about or even feel the responsibility around. So on an issue basis, I would say like next gen, how do we protect? And then next gen, long term, how do we create a healthy
habits,
human,
Yeah.
right? Because it is dehumanizing. It
Yeah.
is when we just operate through a screen.
Adama, Sam, what do you ladies think?
I mean, I have so much on this. I don't know, Adama, you want to go first? You want me to just rail it off?
Go for it.
I think your points are really well made and taken on sort of the relationship between companies and legislators. But I also think it's so important to understand that nothing is a monolith, right? The tech companies aren't, the stakeholders aren't, the legislators aren't. And there are a lot of reasons people get into legislation, and they have a lot of different experiences, right? You do not have to have a high school degree to be a legislator, for example. You can be a convicted felon. And in some cases, that is a great lived experience to bring to the table, particularly, whatever you're working on. But they're all very different. They all come from different places and they're there for different reasons. And so there are legislators that are very driven by helping people. There are legislators who are very driven by going after certain companies. And there are others that, are kind of disingenuous and do not come to the table. And I think you mix that with an array of tech companies who have different ethos on how to interact with regulators, who have different business models, some who, understand they cannot control all of the potential harms that might come through their ecosystem, and other people who might intentionally be allowing those harms to monetize them. And you sort of throw them all in a pot, and people have to weed out what that means. And that can get very complicated. It gets very easy to oversimplify. And I think that's why oftentimes some of the easiest bills on privacy or AI or social media you see go through really are around things that are like save the children or like save the women from predators. And it actually doesn't matter if you have women jumping up and down going, this will not help me with a predator. The legislators, some of them will say, yes, it will. No, this is what I'm doing. I'm helping women. You're welcome. There is this sort of like gut check of intent and knowledge and needing to collaborate that requires a bigger community view and can really just create some unfortunate policy. And over the last 2 decades or so of working on technology policy, I've dealt with this back when we were trying to regulate encryption standards, right? There were legislators who wanted to say it has to be encrypted to this degree in this way, or we need a backdoor on this kind of phone. And they were really trying to limit the policy to a specific technology and a specific use case. When the reality is there are privacy principles, there are data use principles that have been well established that apply across the board here. And so it's what's the intent and how is it being used? Who's collecting the data? What was the reason they collected it? How are they going to use it? Did I know about it? Am I informed about it? And that sort of series of questions of the who, what, when, where, why that can apply to any technology platform, but would inform you as to, well, this product you're seeing right now, you're seeing it for this reason, and your data went to them because of this. Otherwise, we have a scenario where you're just driving in your brand new car and it tells you, hey, you need an oil change. Here's the 3 places you should go. And of course, they're the 3 places that have some sort of an affiliate owner relationship with your car manufacturer. And you never hear of any other place. It's bad for you. It's bad for small businesses. It may not be the best deal for you. And so I think just getting folks to understand none of the stakeholder groups are monolithic. And that beyond that, regardless of the technology, you have to think about it in terms of how is information being collected? How is it being used? How is it being conveyed and why, without regard to the specific tool? Because tools are changing too fast at this point to limit it to Instagram or Facebook or whatever.
Right.
I think it's going to be interesting too to see how actually Gen I can be a friend to that, right? Again, like that is a big ask and a big responsibility to put on AI. And I have optimism in the technology. I, again, do not have optimism in the leaders behind many of those companies. But I do think that there is an opportunity where AI actually would be a fabulous tool, right? To mark what is sponsored, right? To, if I'm an unbiased, the emphasis on the quotes, unbiased perspective, right? To be able to say, hey, this is why you're being suggested these 3 gas stations. And it is also based on this data that is available. Do you want this data available? We can make sure it's no longer available, right? Again, if we lived in a perfect world, that would be my hope for actually how things like AI, which are sort of viewed right now as being scary, could actually be really helpful and get us to a better future. But again, that is putting a lot of responsibility on Spider-Men and superheroes that I don't think actually sit in those seats, unfortunately. But it would maybe be different if it was women, just saying.
We agree.
I don't know, Claire. I feel like I do my part to train AI every single day. My daughter and her friends the other night were on me and just said, why are you are always using AI tools. Why are you giving this much of your information to AI? And I'm like, no, I love this. This is like, you're lucky I'm not talking to you about this all the time. Like I love training AI tools and I love seeing how it works and where. And to me, that's really fascinating. And my data is proliferated all over the internet anyway at this point. So
me too. It's also anyway, it may as well be working for me.
But that's the thing, right? Like some of this, or so much of this, like the horse has already left the barn, right? The barn door is closed. The horse is 30 miles down the road. And my concern is that sometimes we all just feel like it doesn't matter, right? Our data is already out there. Like all of our privacy has been breached. And I feel like young people feel like that as well. They're like, screw it, just put everything out there. It doesn't matter. They'll be able to find it. And some of us, like Sam and I, got to actually still have that like college, high school experience that was analog and offline. Like, thank God. Like, Facebook came around in like 2002, 3, 4, 5.
99. Because I
I
was in college when it came. It was 99. I was
out of high school. Like you don't, if you look back at my like Facebook or whatever, I don't have high school or like college stuff on there. And I feel like young people at this point are like, screw it, all my photos are already out there. Throw it into the, and I've heard young people say that, especially about Snapchat, just throw it into the void. Who cares? Right.
It doesn't happen that way.
And that's the thing. And I worry that we don't do a good enough job on transparency. So to Sam's point, like, what is the data that's being used? Why is it being used? Who is it being shared with? Because we all get those long privacy things and we're just like, ugh, accept, right?
Yeah, nobody reads us.
Because you're like, I'm going to use it anyway. Like, I need to use this service. I need to use this platform. It doesn't matter. So like, I just worry that we don't think through a lot of these things. And then policymakers they are kind of laser focused on the biggest red flag issue, right? And then you have parents who are trying to figure out how to keep their kids and their personal information and their faces and their bodies and photos like that off the internet. And you've got all of these like conflicting things. And then I look at the companies and I frankly feel like they need to do a better job, and maybe they're getting better. But I remember talking to different technology companies and they're like, fuck policymakers. We're new. We're doing cool stuff. They shouldn't be stopping.
They're never going to catch up to us anyway.
Innovation. You're killing the innovation.
Like anytime you try to do anything, some of these companies are like, you are killing our business model. Like we can't. And I'm just kind of like, but if your business model is exploitative,
right.
Like
this is all
and again,
great.
playing the long game, right? If you're
Right.
actually thinking about the value of a company and the investment, if you're really thinking about that, right? And
that's right.
I think that's really, the founder persona. I've worked alongside hundreds of them, right? Like directly and indirectly. That founder persona, I think, is a really slippery slope, and it can be really dangerous, especially in the creator economy when you're dealing with people's lives and their livelihoods. Kind of back to Maddie's point, and toxicity and, different paths and your online persona versus who you actually are and what's real and what's not. Like, I do think that founder persona can be dangerous because they're often not operators. They're often not thinking about the full picture, and they're often in a place of privilege, especially these big platforms. Like back in the day, sitting in a seat telling them how to navigate something they don't know about because what they were doing was cool and sexy and cutting edge. And I do think that those two things are so correlated. And there's actually probably a huge loss of profitability and revenue in the walkbacks that they've had to do.
Oh, for sure.
I think there's something that I like, if you, and I haven't necessarily seen studies on this, and I've read a lot of studies, so I welcome them if anyone has thoughts watching this or otherwise here. But I think, when you look at kind of the Gen X population and prior, particularly boomers and otherwise, there's this expectation that there are rules and there's a social construct and almost this sort of confusion whenever there's a new tool. Like, how do we apply the rules of behavior and the social construct to this new tool? And then I think our millennial generation really got thrown into, it's madness, it's chaos, there are no rules, it's just tools. And those are really the folks who, had their nudes leaked and had, personal conversations and their livelihoods ruined because of something they were stupid and they said the ninth grade that went all over, Twitter or whatever. And then you sort of have this generation that's my daughter's generation who I think feel very differently, which is, of course, there are rules, of course, there are social constructs, and of course, there are behaviors. And just because you're using a new tool doesn't mean you get to play dumb and upend the reality of how people behave and respect themselves and their autonomy. And they have this just much more kind of organic sense of like, well, of course that is wild. Why would you allow that? I would never go on that platform that does that thing because it doesn't respect that basic social construct. And so I think sometimes we make policymaking, we make the development of these tools more complicated than it needs to be, right? Because are you giving people autonomy? Are you respecting them, et cetera? And I've seen that generationally. And I do wonder how that, as the folks my daughter's age start being more empowered to work on these type of tools and in regulatory environments, how does that sort of push back? Because it's been a long, winding road to get back to the same point. Like, how do you want to be treated and how do you want to treat people, regardless of how you're choosing to communicate?
And I've also started to see, just because I have friends now who have kids who are, Ashley's age, but also younger, and they're just like, my kids don't get a phone. And if they get a phone, it doesn't connect to the internet. And if it does, you can only text like your mom, your dad, and like two of your best friends.
Firefly phones. Remember the Firefly phones? You could only call like 3 buttons.
That's right.
Programmed. I'm like, bring them back.
And there's no internet. And they're just like, and by the way, if there's like a whole little cohort and none of them have phones. And if you have a phone, you can't be in that cohort because the parents have decided we don't want whatever that influence is that may be through social media or like other platforms. So it does feel like if the companies won't do it, if government won't do it, consumers will start to put those guardrails around it, right? And consumers will start to self-select either the systems and processes that work for them or the platforms that are respecting what they feel like those boundaries should be.
Well, I think that latter is so important because in terms of the tools themselves, like what you just described, I know a lot of folks are doing, but it is inherently a privileged perspective. It means that your child has access to be able to do their homework, that you have access to be able to, get healthcare to communicate in other ways. You don't have a latchkey child, which, I was. So you have to have a certain economic standing and support system to create a scenario where your kid can operate off a 3-button phone for a prolonged amount of time, and you can keep them off of a computer. And so the sort of tools that aren't limited in that way to that sort of privilege are essential, right? Because otherwise, the only way kids are doing their homework, we learned this during COVID. You had all sorts of kids dropping off when they were at home because, they were all like camping around the McDonald's parking lot.
There's no Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, right? With the phone. So,
Wow.
So, there's a lot of considerations there in terms of like who has the access to even protect their kids in that way.
Yep.
And I think that's where the onus does fall on developers and regulators to think through, what's the
last mile
construct, right?
Yeah. A common, theme kind of underpinning what we're talking about right now is tech. And as we wrap part 1 of this conversation, Claire, as a teaser for part 2, you said something when we were prepping for this conversation that really hit me to my core. And you said, tech broke my heart. So on our next episode, I would really like to hear more about that heartbreak journey and how it's informed what you now do. And then let's dive into the various tech platforms out there and like how we use them and how they're impacting how we consume modern media and how we understand our world, because the world is crazy. And whatever device or whatever app you might be using, like your understanding of it could vary significantly from somebody who lives down the street from you nowadays. So with that, as we wrap part 1, Claire, any pieces of advice for anybody who wants to learn more about the creator economy or is just interested in this, burgeoning sector? Any tips you have?
I'm going to steal one that I heard recently from Tyler, the Creator, which is actually kind of relevant. But I'm also just a huge fangirl. He, in a recent interview, said, in all things, create like a child, but edit like a scientist. And I think that that's really important advice back to individuals as you're navigating the creator economy, whether you are a creator or you're consuming creators and influencers on these platforms, like to still create and consume like a child, right? Like still be curious, still be open to things, still try new things, like let that innovation still exist. But in terms of editing like a scientist, do that with your own content, do that with your own feeds as you're curating what you're consuming, right? Know that you still have the power to unfollow something or to block trad wives or whatever, right? If that's what you need to do.
Trad wives, okay.
That's what you need to do, right? But also, same advice for the platforms, right? Like let yourselves create like a child, come out with new features, come out with new products and releases and editing capabilities and all of the things, embrace it all, create, but then go back and edit like a scientist, check it, make sure that people aren't being harmed, make sure that people aren't exhausted by this thing, make sure that people aren't losing fucking brain cells every second. Like, start to think about how we edit it like a real scientist that is crafting the future. So that's my new favorite piece of advice. I've been using it on every call.
Love it.
So this call is no exception. And I think actually tees up a little bit of the heartbreak story as well.
All right. Well, we look forward to diving into it on our next episode. Listeners, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit subscribe so you get alerted when our next episode with Claire and future awesome guest drops. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you next time.